Hi, everybody. I'm really excited today because we have Ant Murphy with us. He's going to be one of our experts. We are publishing him any day now. By the time you watch this, maybe he will already be live. And I've been following him for years. This is someone that I turn to for advice, mainly about dual track. So that's what we've worked with him on. He teaches me how to keep the flow between my team and its operations super smooth and well done. And he's been working in the game for over 15 years. He's a world-class product coach working with companies like Miro, Stack Overflow, and many others. He's my guru for this, and his content is super refreshingly genuine and tangible and practical. So I'm really excited to have him with us today. And welcome.
Thanks. Keen to be here. Keen to chat about it. Yeah, dual track's good.
Okay, so let's dig into our first question. We've all heard so much good things from you and others about the dual track method, but it might be still a little hazy for some people. It brings together discovery and delivery to reduce risk and maximize impact. I would love to hear your take on this. Why is it so crucial for product teams to focus on both discovery and delivery? And how does this dual approach improve decision-making and their product outcome?
I'd say the first thing that comes to mind around this is that it's almost like an acceptance that the first time we do things, it's not going to be amazing, right? Like we hope it is. We hope we hit a home run, but you don't always hit a home run. In fact, I would say my experience has been, and I'm sure you can probably agree with this, that it's definitely not the first time. It's usually just third, fourth, not even the second, right? Like it's the third, fourth, fifth iteration that things start to get good. So if we accept that things take time to refine, and even if we do like discovery, right? Like discovery, as you framed, it's about de-risking, but that doesn't mean that we can reduce risk altogether. And it doesn't mean that it is a silver bullet that if you do discovery, you're going to come up with the world's best thing and you're going to nail it the first go. So once you make that acceptance, then we need to have some type of feedback loop that goes between them, right? And if you move towards this more continuous discovery, continuous delivery world, this dual track world is really designed to try and do that, right? Where we have a tight feedback loop between that V1 and learning about it, trying to make it better, do a V2 quicker. And I think that's probably the big thing. So I think about things like reducing that feedback loop, reducing our time from idea to impact, as I often frame it as, not trying to claim that framing at all. I think there's also like the reality that problem solutions are intertwined together as well. So it's all messy and it's all kind of connected. And maybe the last thing that I think about here as well that it always helps with is trying to find that equilibrium between, are you learning faster than you can ship, or are you shipping faster than you can learn? And naturally you kind of want this like equilibrium between the two where you're kind of regularly shipping stuff out the door and you're learning at the same pace. And then that idea to impact cycle is really short and it kind of ties it all together.
Second question. When it comes to the discovery phase specifically, because you did highlight my favorite thing, which is how do we de-risk that phase? I'm wondering what kind of opportunity research do you find most valuable? And especially when building that first version, how do you guide teams to uncover those best opportunities?
First version in particular is probably, if I zoom in on that one, I think that's more specific and probably a little bit nuanced and different. I think one of the first things that comes to my mind and that I work with teams, and I think teams miss this, and I don't want to say they get it wrong, I think they just like miss it, is that breaking down that problem space, right? So often the problem space that we're dealing with can be very, very big, depending on where our starting point is. Like sometimes our outcomes are really, really big, like increased revenue or something like that. And we actually need to break that down. So trying to explore that opportunity space is all about doing that. And sometimes, so I'm dealing with this challenge. I actually had a coaching call earlier today about this, and we're literally talking about it. So maybe a little bit of recency bias to throw this in there, but we're talking about exactly this, right? Like it's really big. There's a lot of space. It's very ambiguous. So what do we do? Like it feels like it's almost overwhelming and it's too much, and I don't know where to start. And how do I? And also like she said it to me, senior product manager. She said, I feel like we could interview for the rest of the year. Like it's so big. Like we could just talk to people for 6+ months, right? So how do we, obviously we don't want to do that. We don't want to spend 6 months doing that. But like, how do we start to narrow this down? And sometimes you need to go, there's different ways. So we talked about many different things, but sometimes you need to do like a broad and shallow kind of slice, right? Like you can't spend 6 months, but could we spend 6 days, or can we spend maybe 6 weeks or somewhere in between, right? Like a week or two. And can we go really broad but shallow and acknowledge that we're only going shallow? So we've de-risked a little bit, but we haven't managed to de-risk a lot. But we need to make a decision. So what we're trying to do is get confidence. So then the next question is what we're discussing, which is like, okay, now that we've gone kind of broad and shallow, what do we have confidence on? And maybe confidence is our barometer to make a decision. And maybe we start in, and this is the same for, this is my point about the first version, maybe the first version ends up not being the number one most important opportunity because we might have missed it because we weren't broad and shallow. But based on the information that we had, we're confident that it was probably in the top 3. Maybe if it ends up being the 3rd most important, well, now we know that it's the 3rd most important, but we could have spent 6 months trying to discover that and work that out, or we could have spent 6 days to work that out, 6 days to pick it and then do something and then work it out. And that's okay. Now we've done the 3rd most important thing. Let's now use that learning that we now know what the 1st most important thing is and then deliver that next, right? Like that's the point about breaking this down and making it iterative. I think the other things that come to mind around exploring the opportunity space is exposure time. I think this is the whole point of the continuous discovery side of the fence, continuous interviewing and stuff. I had a mentor once say to me, you're better off doing 10 rounds of 10 interviews as opposed to one round of 100. Like, so that 6 months would have been like one round of 100. Whereas we do 10, make a decision, do another 10, realize that decision was the 3rd best decision, not the best, but that's okay. And we're already kind of ahead than if we did 100. That kind of makes sense.
It sounds almost to me like the recommendation, if you're doing discovery and you're looking to do a first big opportunity and there's a lot of options on the table, it's almost like you recommend a T-shape. Like just go broad and then pick one and go deep.
I mean, that's a good way to frame it. And yes, I'm a very visual person, so I don't know why I've never put that image in my head before. But it is kind of that, right? Like, yeah, I mean, it is. You want to go broad, and then you want to go deep because you're essentially trying to make a decision. Then go deep into an area, and then use that depth. And this is the point about the dual track too. Like, kind of alluded to it with the whole like problem versus solution dichotomy and how it's actually all intertwined, right? So the nature of going deep into one space can help you learn that space was not the most important as we thought it was. It's the 3rd most important, right? So this doing the solution or the solution in and doing some solution, doing that first version is a way to learn. There's nothing wrong with learning more about the problem via the solution. Like the two things are intertwined. Like I think we try to do this clean cut of like problem tick solution, right? But you can learn about the problem with the solution. That's totally okay.
That is such another good nugget. The solution can be as big of a discovery tool as the discovery phase, which is also why, like, don't be afraid to go build it because you're going to learn a lot more in the doing and in the shipping than you will in the research in some cases. Super great insight right there. 3rd question, let's talk more about the delivery phase because we're kind of moving that direction anyway. When you are getting early feedback and you want to make sure that you're on track to those user expectations, we always hope for the best response. It doesn't always happen. How do you recommend the teams gather quality feedback on those initial builds, especially when they're tight on resources and maybe working with limited time? So the opportunities to change are limited. What's the best way to find out quickly if you're hitting the mark?
There's many different tools or different ways to do this. Actually, I can think of another example, and this was another coaching conversation I had today. So I'm full of reason. Maybe we did this at a really good time. Actually, now I'm like thinking about it, had a good day for this. So one of the things that we're going through, and we're going through this previous week with this product manager, and we kind of refined it further this week, is finding. Sometimes you can find little little I'm a fan of things like one question surveys to just give you something really tangible. So one of the surveys that they've been running for a while now, this wasn't what we were discussing, but something that company's been doing is essentially after conversion, they do the Sean Ellis kind of PMF, product market fit survey, which is like if you lost access or didn't have this product, how would you be very disappointed, or not at all? And they've been measuring that, and that's like a simple one question kind of survey that they send at the end. Great little barometer to test that they're still hitting the mark. And actually we talked about it a little bit today because it trended down a little bit, and we're kind of analyzing why we think that might have happened. They're still above the 40%, but it trended down. Fun fact. But little survey. So this was the problem that we were looking at. So we're trying to test like trust is really what he was trying to solve with this feature. And I'm not going to get too into the feature because it'll take way too long to explain it all. And then we're discussing like, okay, how do you get some early signals, like leading indicators on trust? And again, how do you do it really cheap and quickly and feedback? And we went through a bunch of ideas, but the one that we landed on was, how there's like those little thumbs up, thumbs down type things, right? Like, and that can be a question survey too, right? Like, as well. And then some products actually build it in, right? So like at the end of the thing that they're displaying, which the whole idea of displaying this thing is to try and build trust, just have like this little, was it useful? Thumb up, thumb down. And yes, you're only going to get like 1% or less click on it. But if you've got enough volume going through, it's going to give you some early signals. If you get a bunch of thumbs down, that's going to tell you something. And of course that's quantitative, but it should be a early signal to make you go and work out why that's occurring and what's happening, right? And maybe this is another principle. Anything you're measuring should lead to action. That's how I always think about it with like measurement and metrics. If you're measuring something and it doesn't lead to action, like why do you have it? And maybe that's another thing if you're really tight on time and resources and money and people, like you can scale stuff really far back because you can just ask yourself, like, if this metric went up or down, what's my hypothesis about it, and what would I do, right, as a result of it? And if you can't think of an answer, you just like maybe to get rid of it or like don't look at it or whatever, right? Like you really want it to lead to action. So I think that's it. Yeah, probably leave it up.
Okay, so there were multiple things I took away in that. First of all, we love a Sean Ellis test. Like that's the best way, and I think also one of the fastest ways to measure if someone really loves the product or the feature. I love the thumbs up, thumbs down as a fast indicator of value, and then this idea of streamlining what you're tracking as well, because I think all product managers kind of get, the ones who are very data oriented can nerd out very easily, and we get very like, okay, I want to see this and this and this and this and this and this and this. But then you forget, like, you have to track all of that over time. And if you do that for every single release, you're going to be pretty exhausted or pretty, lost in the numbers. So I love this advice about if you don't know what you would do with an up or down trend of that number, maybe don't measure it. And it almost feels like you're giving us the advice of, for early impact analysis, be MVP mode on your data.
Yeah.
And then look for like maybe one or two additional indicators of an up down that you want to dig into.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe I'll just add on to that. Definitely be MVP. And that's part of it too. Like the thumbs up, thumbs down, you can poke holes in that. Like there's so many, like, what does it actually mean? And like, if somebody did say thumbs down, is it really got to do with like trust that we're trying to test there? Or do they just not like the format or the colors that we decided to use? And yeah, you can post holes in it, but that's not really the point. It's not meant to be a perfect measurement. It's meant to be a early indication that something is happening and we should probably investigate it. And then if you investigate it, it's like, oh, they just didn't like the colors. Okay, whatever. Then fine. But the alternative to that is something like, well, the only way we can really know this for certain is to interview people and actually talk to them and actually like observe them use the product, which is very, very expensive and also takes time. So that means we need to release the feature. We need to let people use it for a while. Then we need to reach out to all those people, and your feedback loop just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So even though it's an imperfect measurement and an imperfect thing, we're trying to bring that feedback loop in so we can take action early is really the intent.
after that first version is out, so you've done your de-risking, you've done your project selection, you've researched it, you're ready to build, you've launched something, you've got your early feedback. You've done so much. Now you want to understand, what else do I need to do with this? How does Discovery 2.0 look to you? And what advice do you give to teams to refine that approach with real feedback?
I encourage teams to really have like a opportunity backlog, and kind of all these things should feed into that, right? So these are just, and I also encourage them to treat it like any other opportunity. So a V2 on something, or feedback about how we could, how might we improve the product, is just another opportunity. And you can argue that we have to weigh that against some other new opportunity, right? Which could be some new problem space to stare into. Now, obviously, one's going to be a little bit more known, one's probably going to be a little bigger versus smaller. So those dimensions come into it. And then obviously, a lot of times you do end up prioritizing improving the feature that you're already on. Equally, I've also said this to teams before, when they do move on to the next thing, I'm like, if you prioritize that opportunity space and that solution above the one that you've now started to work on, then by default, that was already more important. So unless something new has happened that's told you that that's less important now, which does happen, right? Like, okay, this isn't as important, then arguably you should be still refining that feature and doing a V2 and V3 before you even move on to something else. Now, obviously there's downtime and stuff, and you can do things in parallel, but yeah. So I think collecting it all, tracking it as opportunities, opportunity backlog is a great way to handle that. Prioritizing against each other is generally how I, again, kind of go through it, and take it through the same process. Actually, probably the last thing I'll add on to this is, when you do take it through the same process, not everything is, because there's different dimensions of like size and risk, and well, risk covers uncertainty. I was going to say like uncertainty and confidence, but risk kind of covers that. But because there's different dimensions of that, not everything is going to need like discovery, really. Some things are going to be like, oh, this is clearly doesn't work, like let's just change it, and we know what to change it to, or we have really good or high confidence into changing it. And then there's not a lot of risk there. So if you always frame discovery as a de-risking tool, which I love that you framed it that way, then when you think about that, you can look at something and say, well, we have high confidence that this is a problem, because like we can see it and we can see the data because people are using it. It's really, really small. The effort to try and change it is, probably smaller than, a couple of days effort or something, just as a hypothetical. And that's, we're pretty confident on some solutions around that, right? Because it's a known problem space. We kind of solved similar things in the past. Well, just go and do it, right? Like just use that feedback and let it allow you to just action something. I think that's probably worth calling out, and that's why I was thinking about it when I was thinking of anything else to add on to this, which is maybe just trying to give people permission to do that, because I think sometimes we always want to put everything through the whole gamut, and you don't necessarily need to.
I think that is the wisest thing that I've heard in a long time. If you don't need to put something through a full discovery process, don't. If your internal indicators are leaning towards go do, and it's small, then it's worth doing rather than investing in the de-risking, because you've already sort of got a gut sense that it's good to go. Excellent idea. Now, I would like to talk to you a little bit about B2C, B2B world. Does the game change, especially maybe in discovery, where it's a different level of contact between those two groups?
I mean, absolutely, it changes. As somebody who's had experience across both, and have clients across both, and I've had some larger enterprise clients as well that do both, right? Like they've got a B2C kind of side of the business and a B2B side of the business. Some of the big changes that happen is, obviously on a B2B side, you start to have, buyers and users, which is always like, you start to have this complex or more complex network of like different type of personas and users and user segments. Because often in the B2B space, the people buying it and the people who have like the wallet, then the cash to actually, and the authority to sign off on it, and then the people using it are all different people. And sometimes you can have 3 or 4 or 5 different people in that whole kind of process, which you need to understand. So when you think about discovery, you think about opportunities, it's opportunities across all of them. Do I solve, and that makes it hard too, because like sometimes you're weighing up, do I solve this end user problem that they're like struggling with? Or do I solve this problem that is really more of a tender process buyer problem, but that can win us money, right? Like we could win more deals with that, but that doesn't really help the end user. But we also don't help the end user if we can't get customers to buy our product. Like if end users don't use our product, then we're not helping them, are we? So then you get this weird tension going on where, and that's really, really hard to navigate. And I think that's hard to do with discovery. I think the other thing too, and when you start to get into that world, obviously some of those people are very niche roles and hard to get access to, right? I coached a product leader in a startup that built products for financial controllers in large enterprises. They're a bootstrapped company, actually out of the UK, so Europe, kind of towards your way. That's what I was thinking. And yeah, but like very niche. Like you're talking about these financial controllers and analysts inside, and it has to be a large enterprise that's multinational, right? Because they have to deal with multiple currencies and multiple banks and multiple entities. That was the whole problem that they solved. Now, very, very niche. And when you're dealing with like these 10,000, tens of thousands people companies, like how do you reach out to these people? I actually wrote an article about that, which talked about that. But like some of the strategies are like actually use LinkedIn. Like you can find cold outreach on these people, and that's uncomfortable to do, but buckle in, and that's the job. So get involved amongst that. But yeah. So there's different strategies there. Also, I think leveraging friends. What else? I think there's probably a safety element as well. B2C is easier to do like beta programs and alpha programs and do early access. B2B a lot harder. We tend to leverage more things like user communities, those types of things, forums, that type of stuff. There's even like just the feedback pace, I think, too. It's probably more industry dependent than like B2B, B2C specifically, but I think that like your feedback loop is obviously going to change. Yeah.
Okay, amazing. There's definitely a lot of strategies to use, but what I'm taking away is that B2B is slightly more difficult because of the lack of like direct, easy access, and sometimes the complication of doing testing in an environment that is much more demanding in terms of security, compliance, et cetera, et cetera. And it's also a different ballgame in terms of actually getting the outreach and how do you get the B2B folks to actually talk to you, and this complexity around the different discovery of those two environments, one being user, the other being user, buyer people. Even there's like a different profile. The buyers and the companies are not the same people who hold the purse strings, and having multiple angles for those folks, and then that weighing of how do you prioritize the money rolling in now versus the value rolling in soon. One is a long-term bet, one is a short-term bet, it sounds like to me. Those are definitely complexities between the two. Thank you for outlining all of that. Last question. For teams that are just getting started in this dual track method, what are your best advice for their first steps? What should they do first to get off on the right foot on discovery and then delivery?
First steps. To try and shift towards the continuous mode, the nature of it, you have to start to break I've mentioned this before, break that problem space down, because as long as that problem space is really big, it's going to be very hard to have that smaller feedback loop. Now, that's sometimes a hard first step, but I think, talking about that T-shape, maybe I'll start calling it the T-shape approach. But that type of approach is where you need to start to think about, right? So if you've got something big, how do I make it smaller? How do I, and you can time box things too. Like constraints are sometimes good things, right? So how can I learn something in a week, or even if you do sprints? So this is something I do with my clients too. If they're already working in like Scrum and say they're already pretty good at continuous delivery, but it's the discovery muscle that they're missing. Well, they're already working in things like 2-week cadences, and they've got elements of Scrum going on. So cool, let's just follow that. So if we have a 2-week time box, rather than just planning what we're going to deliver in the 2-week time box, let's plan what we're going to discover as well. And if you use that as a forcing function to say, well, what can I learn in 2 weeks, and use that time box to make a decision to then try and build something. And then you start to force yourself to say, well, based on that learning, what can I start to build in the 2 weeks? Now, you don't need to perfectly go 2-week discovery, 2-week delivery, and make it kind of perfectly work that way. I don't think that's definitely not the point. But if you use it as a bit of a forcing function to think about breaking things down and making it smaller, and sometimes that first 2 weeks would be to kind of go that broad and shallow, so you know where that first starting point might be. So I think that's definitely something to do first. I think just following the cadence can go a long way. In my experience working with companies, just sitting down and sprint planning and being like, what are we going to discover this sprint, and what are we going to build? Like, that's already going to get you pretty far. The other one that is probably the other really tangible thing that you can use that I work with a lot of my clients on is actually just do like assumptions mapping. So love that technique, David J. Bland, Testing Business Ideas. But it's essentially, you can Google it, assumptions mapping. But the intent is like, if we can just come up with what questions and assumptions do I have around this space, right? And then prioritize that. And then that becomes your like discovery backlog, as I often call it with my clients. And then if you're doing what I just said before, you can look at those assumptions and say, well, I think these top 4 assumptions we can test this sprint. Okay. And then planning is like, how are we going to test it? Okay, well, maybe we can run a micro survey for this, and then maybe we could look at some data for this, and maybe we could build a prototype for this, or whatever it is, right? Generally, I encourage like interview, prototype, survey, data is pretty. And when I say data, I mean like sourcing existing data that you probably already have, or like going on market research type thing, desktop research to find data. That's going to be the 80-20. Those 4 things are going to cover most scenarios. Of course, there's other research techniques, better, more impactful research techniques, but it's going to get you there. So assumptions, do that, plan, use a time box. I've coined that minimum viable product discovery, by the way. But yeah, if you do that, you'll be off to the races.
I love those. Okay, so have a backlog of opportunities that you want to learn about, assumption map, make a plan out of that, then do a interview, prototype, survey, data sort of approach, and you will discover the 80-20. Awesome. Great advice. Thank you so much for being with us. And it's been amazing. I've learned so much, even just in this conversation. And I've been following you for a long time. So that shows how much you can really bring in your coaching activities to people. Thank you for being one of our trusted experts and letting us feature you on UserSnap. And thanks for taking the time to chat.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's I always enjoy our chat, so it's been it's good and enjoyable for me as well. So yeah, hopefully it was valuable.
I'm sure it was. Bye, everybody.